So I'm just going to pray really quick, more for my own benefit. Lord, I just pray that you would guide my words this morning. I pray that you would prepare the hearts of everybody here. I pray that it would be your message that gets through, Lord. If it starts to become too much of my own opinion or my own thoughts, Lord, I pray that you would stop me. And we just ask that your word would go forth today, that hearts would be changed, and that people would see your heart for them. In Jesus' name, amen. If you looked on the website, or if you get the Family of Hope newsletter that goes out, it said the title of my teaching was Relationships. And I kind of like that you just left it at that, because it kind of leaves it very open to what it could be. I shared a few months back, I think it might have been in April, we had a women's meeting at my house. So if you were there, this is pretty much what I taught that day, but I've had months to think about it more, to pray about it more. And David had asked me to share not long after that, and I knew immediately that this is what I wanted to talk about. So I'm hoping if you were there at my house that day that you still get a lot out of it today. David also found a quote for me that he put on the newsletter, and it said, "Damaged psyches aren't the problem. The problem is disconnected souls. What we need is connection, and what we need is a healing community." And I hadn't seen that beforehand, but that's exactly what I really want to talk about, because the relationships that I mean, it can absolutely apply to marriages. It can apply to any sort of relationship, but I'm talking about the community of believers and the church. And when I heard healing community, I loved it, because isn't that what we're supposed to be, or what we want to be? You know, you think of a community of healing. When you were just praying for 9/11, it's, you get choked up, we all get emotional over it, because we're a community, we're a family. And in order to become a true community of healing and of fellowship and family, first we have to be connected to God. That's the most important connection and relationship that we have. And then we need to form connections with each other. And that's the basis of what I want to talk about. So the importance of meeting together, forming relationships as the church body, and also hand in hand with that, the dangers of allowing yourself to become isolated from the church and from other believers. I will be reading off of this a lot. I'm going to try my best to also go with it, but I had to write everything down because otherwise I'd forget something. So something that I've noticed, I've been a Christian since I was 17 years old. I feel like I knew about God my whole life. I loved God my whole life, but I didn't really accept Jesus until around then. I've been a Christian since then. I've now worked in a Christian school. I'm going into my 11th year of doing that, so I'm around Christians a lot. And I've noticed that there are a lot of things that get in the way of us forming meaningful relationships. And I don't just mean that you walk in, "Hey, how you doing? Oh, good, me too. Okay, bye, I gotta go, I'm chasing my kids." Because that's me every week, that's what I do. And I'll get to that later, but there are a lot of things that I think get in the way of us forming meaningful, lasting relationships. And I don't just mean our church, I don't just mean church buildings in general, but again, the body of believers and followers of Christ. And I think that not forming relationships is something that has to change. I think that if we don't start forming relationships that matter and actually caring about each other, we're going to continue to see people leave churches. We're going to continue to see people struggling through things alone. We're going to see people without hope, and we're going to see people without a real understanding of God and his love, or a twisted version of what God is and what his love is. Ultimately, we see people all the time walking alone, and that was never God's intention for us at all. I even think back to the Garden of Eden. He realized almost immediately Adam needed somebody with him. And all throughout the Bible, people are put into communities or put into families, people that take care of each other. We were never meant to walk through life alone. And you see so many people doing that and losing hope. So what I want to talk about today briefly, I hope briefly, I have 3 things that I think get in the way of forming meaningful relationships. And I'm sure there's more than that. And I'm just going to touch a little bit on each one of them. I feel like each one of them could be their own teaching in and of themselves, so I'm going to try not to talk too long on one particular one. You may find you fall into one or all of the categories, or maybe a separate category. But after thinking about it a lot and praying about it, and I guess looking at that women's meeting as kind of my trial run, everybody seemed to agree that busyness, bitterness, and insecurity really stop a lot of meaningful relationships from being formed. So the first one I'm going to talk about is busyness. And at the women's meeting, at least, the second I said that, I feel like everybody was like, oh, yeah, I'm so busy. And I think whether you're a man or a woman, everybody's busy. We live in a society that's fast-paced. We are constantly filling our schedules. Adam and I are probably the king and queen of filling our schedule with things we have to do and things we probably don't have to do. Whether you work a 9-to-5 job or whether your job is caring for your children, which is a 24-hour plus job. Maybe you're doing both. Maybe you're working outside of the home and taking care of your children. Whatever it is, we all seem to have this endless list of to-dos, things that we have to do. I don't have time for that. I can't do that. And as soon as we have that moment to ourselves, that's exactly what we want it to be, a moment to ourselves. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want anybody to need me for anything for a minute. I want to be able to sit down and not be pawed at. I want, whatever it is, we're all exhausted. I feel like so many people I talk to, myself included, it's like, how are you doing? Good. Just tired. I'm so tired. And it's hard. And don't get me wrong, we absolutely need rest. And you do need time to yourself. And you do need that kind of thing. But I think the problem is that our busy lives and schedules get in the way of things that maybe we should be doing. And they get in the way of reaching out to others and spending time with them. And I was talking to a friend the other day about our busy schedules, and we were talking about how we feel like we take on too much, and we don't know how to say no to people. And we want to help people. Our heart is to bless others, and our heart is to help others, but after a while, it just becomes so much that your heart's not even in it anymore. And you do things out of guilt. And we just find ourselves tired and grumpy with our own family and overwhelmed. And like I said, busyness can be its own teaching. I don't want to go too far off track with it, but I think the key is that amidst our busy schedules and amidst our busy lives, the first thing we need to do is make sure that we carve out time every day to be with God. And whether it's 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night, whether you talk to him all the way to work in the morning, or whether you have a half an hour of prayer time, I don't really think it matters, but making sure that every day you talk to God, that you talk to your Father, that you let him fill you up. And through that, something that I'm trying to learn how to do is to let him show me the things to say yes to and the things that I can let go. Because I don't want to not bless people, and I don't want to not help people, but we don't have to do everything. And I often think of Mary and Martha in the Bible. I won't tell the whole story. I'm definitely a Martha, and I think a lot of people are. Jesus came to Martha's house, and Martha's busy cleaning and cooking and preparing because Jesus is at her house. So she's getting everything ready, and Mary is just laying at Jesus' feet. And I always picture Martha just thinking like, seriously? Like I'm doing the dishes, I'm setting the table, I'm cleaning up after everybody, and you're just laying there at his feet, just laying there. And we've talked about this story before, and that's me. I feel like all I do is constantly clean up after things, or do this or do that, and get mad when people have time to just be. And what Jesus tells Martha at the end of the story, which is the part that kind of really grounds you and brings you back, is he says Mary has everything that she needs. Mary has made the right choice in being with him. And honestly, that's always bothered me a little bit still, because in my head, I'm like, yeah, but then who's going to do all that other stuff? Who's going to, but I think that's the point that God's trying to show me, is there's time to do all of that other stuff. But there are things right in front of us that matter and that we need to do now and that are going to bless people and bless us in return. We can't miss out on the relationships that he wants us to form and the blessings that we can be in other people's lives just because we're too overwhelmed. There's a song, I should have had to do this song today, Desert Song. I think it's by Hillsong, and the last line is, I know I'm filled to be emptied again. The seed I've received I will sow. And I think sometimes as a follower of Christ, there are times where you are going to feel completely poured out, like you have nothing left to give, nothing left to offer. And it's in those times that you have to make the time for God to fill you up, because he's the only one that can. He can give you supernatural energy. He can give you time that you didn't know was there. And that's the time that you can spend forming friendships, fellowshipping with each other. Sometimes you have no idea how much just helping somebody with something. We had friends yesterday, Ben, Josiah, and Keith came over and took a giant tree down in our front yard. I'm sure that's not what they wanted to do yesterday on Saturday morning, but it blessed us so much. Last year, we had everybody help put a roof on our house. Like, these aren't fun things that people enjoy doing, but it means so much to other people. And I also think it's a good light to people who aren't in the church when they see us helping each other and working together and doing life together. Those are the important things. So, just turn my page here. For that, just making sure that you don't get so overwhelmed with the everyday mundane tasks that you're not listening for God to give you an opportunity to bless somebody. So, all right, number 2 is bitterness. And this is a big one, and I think this is where I will end up spending most of the time. I didn't give you any verses in advance, but it's Hebrews 12, 14, and 15 is what I wanted to start with. I have the New Living Translation, but it says, "Work at living in peace with everyone, and work at living a holy life, for those who are not holy will not see the Lord. Look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many." And yeah, the big thing in there for me is corruption, because that's exactly what bitterness does. When you're bitter with somebody, it will corrupt you first, and then it'll start to corrupt everybody around you slowly. It's like a sickness. And I've heard people say so many times, I've probably said it myself over the years, like, well, I believe in God, I love Jesus, but I don't really like Christians very much because they're mean or whatever they are, whatever it is that you're mad at. I don't need to go to church to be a Christian. I still love God. I don't have to communicate with anybody else. And I found over the years that this usually comes from a place of serious hurt or betrayal. People that feel that way have probably been hurt by somebody in the church, and now it's completely skewed their view of everybody, especially Christians. You hear of people leaving churches or hopping from church to church because everywhere they go, there's a problem. Everywhere they go, there's a hypocrite. Everywhere they go, there's somebody that does this. Everybody they go, somebody didn't say hi to them. And it's hard because they become harder and harder and harder and calloused. And it's really hard to get through to people like that. I've struggled with bitterness myself, and it starts small and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I think something that's so important to realize is that churches aren't perfect because people aren't perfect. And that's the whole reason we need Jesus in the first place. If we were all perfect people, we wouldn't need a Savior to come and save us. We say things the wrong way. We offend people all the time. We look at people the wrong way. Maybe one day we're really grumpy and we just, walk right past somebody that you normally say hi to. Or maybe, I don't know, whatever it is. But if your trust in God and your foundation is in people, then it's in the wrong place. So I actually read a really cool article last night that fit really well with this, but it was in Relevant magazine. It was called 5 Really Bad Reasons to Leave Your Church. And it was really good. And all of the reasons were good. But for me, number 5 was exactly what I was trying to say. So I'm going to quote something from it. Reason number 5 was unresolved conflict. One of the reasons that people shouldn't leave church. It says, wherever you find the community of sinning saints, you will find conflict, and lots of it. The church is one big family full of characters and misfits. Sometimes sisters argue, sometimes brothers fight. But despite it all, family is supposed to be the place where you stick together, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And that's going to be my bird statement. That's going to make me cry. We are a family, or we're supposed to be a family. And sometimes we're not good at it. But I think, actually I'll get to that later, but if you can start to look at the people around you as your family, you don't always get along with your family, or you get irritated with your family, or they rub you the wrong way, but when it comes down to it, they're your family. And you have to stick together when it's hard, and especially when it's hard. In the Bible, Paul talks to a lot of churches that deal with that same issue, and you never hear him encouraging them to bail. You never hear him say, you know what, you're right, you should probably just go. They're all terrible people, you should leave. In fact, it's the opposite. You hear him telling everybody to work on whatever the mess is together. Work on it through Christ. Work on it together. In Colossians, and I didn't write down the numbers, so I'll just read it, but it says, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony, and let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts. For as members of one body, you are called to live in peace and always be thankful. And we really don't make allowance for each other's faults very often. We want people to be okay with our faults, but we don't really make allowance for other people's faults. People are not always going to treat you the way you think they should. And I'm saying this to myself just as much. I am one of the most easily offended people, or, I think everybody's out to get me all the time. So it's just as much for me, but people aren't always going to treat you the way you think they should. People are not always going to return the smile that you give them. People aren't always going to necessarily even care about something as much as you care about something. But if you allow yourself to grow bitter, that root will continue to grow. It absolutely will, and it will get deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's very hard to remove. When I shared this at the women's meeting, it was a lot easier for me to talk to a group of women because I felt like we all kind of related in the way that we dealt with things. I don't want to make it an issue of men do this and women do that, but I have noticed that women tend to, when they're bitter, they want to talk about it to everybody else. We gossip about it. We're like, oh, I can't believe that person did that, or I can't believe you said that, or whatever it is. But we never want to go right to that person because that's scary. But you don't want to go right to that person and just say, hey, I heard that you said this, or I heard that this happened, and I don't even know if it's true. We always assume it's true, but we're not sure. And I think maybe not all men, and maybe some women do it too. I think on the other end, the people that don't talk about it to everybody else just keep it in. You're upset about something, you're bitter about something, and you just let it sit there. You don't talk to anybody, you don't pray about it, because why would you want to pray about it? Maybe that would help you. And I think sometimes we like sitting in our anger and our bitterness. We just like it. So, again, it's whether you're talking about it to other people or just keeping it in, that root is just getting deeper and deeper. And I wanted to share something that Ben said back in July when he shared. I don't know if it's a direct quote. I tried really hard. But he said, we sever friendships because we feel slighted. We harbor bitterness with others. And even if we're actually justified, it's not right. And that was the big key for me, because sometimes, technically, I guess you are justified. I mean, if somebody does something to you that's actually wrong, of course you should be upset about it. But it still doesn't give you the right to hold it against them forever. And that's the part that we don't like, because it's not fair, or it seems not fair. We let bitterness ruin old friendships. We let it affect and sometimes even prevent new ones from even forming. Because if one person hurt you, then of course everybody else in the world is going to hurt you. And that's painful. And we don't want to go through it. And the big thing that I've been thinking about all of this is, if we're the healing community, and if we're the face of Christ, or the hands and feet of Christ, if we're the church, it doesn't mean that we don't face the same issues as everybody else. We go through the same things that non-Christians go through. Because we're not perfect people, unfortunately, sometimes we still talk about each other. Sometimes we don't support each other the way we should. Sometimes we're grumpy with each other when we shouldn't be. But I think the difference has to be in the way we handle the issues. We're going to deal with it. It's going to come to us the same way, but the way we deal with it is what's going to set us apart. Are we going to let ourselves remain bitter? And are we going to continue to keep people out of our lives or be angry? Or are we going to forgive and let Jesus show us how to love those people anyway? And I think that's the big thing. And I think if we saw more of that, the church would be a more enticing thing to people. Because I think they look at the church and see exactly what they see in the world. Not all the time, of course, but it's tough. So the third and final thing, is insecurity. And I think we all struggle with that too. We have things about ourselves that we don't like. Even in preparing for this, the little voice in my head was, you talk too much and you talk too fast. Nobody's going to understand what you have to say. You don't have enough Bible verses listed. This is mostly your opinion. And all these things that it wouldn't be a lie to say that I tried to think at least 3 or 4 different ways I could get out of teaching today because of that. And, but we all do that. It may not be speaking, whatever it is. We have things about us that we're uncomfortable with, we don't want other people to see, or things that only we see, that nobody else would notice anyway. We feel inferior. I think about people coming into a church as someone who hasn't been there before and just thinking like, oh, what if nobody in there likes me? What if nobody reaches out to me? And that's another reason that I think as the community of believers, we need to be really active in making those people feel comfortable when they do come in. But I don't know, maybe it's just me that goes through my head, but what if I say something dumb? Or what if I can't say what I mean I'm going to say? What if they think this about me? What if they think that? Or maybe if it's not that kind of thing, maybe you've entered into a church community and you look around and just think, well, I can't measure up to that. Well, I could never stand up and pray for somebody. I don't know how to do that. Or I could never do worship. I can't sing. I can't play an instrument. Or whatever it is. We build up these thoughts in ourselves of all the things we can't do. And it's a perfect opportunity for the enemy to come in and tell you that you're right, but it's a lie. And that's the thing that we have to remember. He loves it when we're insecure. Satan loves when he can find that one thing that bothers you about yourself, because he's going to use any opportunity he can to bring it out in you. And what a better place than in the church where we can just turn on each other. That's exactly what he wants. And we have to be ready for that. There's a quote I love, comparison is the thief of joy. And it is. When we start comparing ourselves to others, all of our joy is just gone. And just any negative feeling that you have about yourself, it's not true. You're good enough because you have Christ in you. And that's all. That's the only reason any of us are good enough anyway. The other thing too, I think insecurities, I remember I've talked to a lot of people over the years that have come to a church, and it's like, well, everybody already knows each other. Everybody grew up together. Everybody has their cliques and has their groups, so why bother? And that sort of insecurity or fear or anxiety of people not accepting you, I think that goes hand in hand with bitterness. It leads you right down the other way, because all of a sudden it's, oh, I don't know, what if they don't like me? Well, they didn't say hi to me anyway. Or, well, those people are always together, so I'm not just going to go over and try to talk to them because they obviously already have a friendship, or whatever it is. And before you know it, your insecurity and your anxieties turn into bitterness. And all of a sudden, you've built this whole thing in your head that's probably not even true. I've done it 1,000,000 times, so I still do it all the time. So just to not let your fear, don't let your anxieties or the things you don't like about yourself prevent you from forming relationships with people. Everybody feels that way sometimes. Everybody has something that makes them uncomfortable, something that they'd rather just shrink back and not talk to anybody. But you have to let God lead you. And I think with his strength, you can get out of your comfort zone and you can make it past all of those things that stand in the way. So I just want to challenge you today. If you are busy, I really encourage you. I know it's really scary to come up and get prayer sometimes. People don't like that or they don't want to be up there. But I feel like there's a lot in here that we can take today. And if you feel like you're really busy and you're just tired and you need rest or you just need somebody to pray for you, please come up and let somebody pray for you. We can pray that time would open up for you, that God would show you how to say no, when to say no, and God would lead you in the places he wants you to be. If you're bitter, that's a really hard one, but please come up for prayer. Sometimes it can take a long time to get bitterness out of your heart. It can take a long time to get the roots out that have gotten so deep, but let somebody pray for you and let somebody help you with that. And if you feel insecure, and I feel like the insecure ones are the ones that are least likely to come up for prayer, because that involves getting in front of everybody. It doesn't have to be that way. You could go over to somebody and ask them to pray for you, or really, if that's out of your reach, I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. Just as when Adam comes back up to play again, just take some time to talk to God yourself. Because I think as Christians, it's so important that we have each other. We have to have each other. We have to have people. We have God, we have Jesus, and we have each other for a reason. And I think the more love we show each other and the more we can work through life together instead of just giving up on each other, people in the outside world will see that. Because everybody wants that. And there has to be something that sets us apart. So let it be our love for each other. So.